Here are our ingredients for today. We're going to start with some New York strip steak. And the way you want to pick steak is you want to find steak that has some marbling in it with the fat to make sure it's not too tough for these dumplings. And then over here we have some onions. They're just yellow onions. And we have some mushrooms. You can use any kind. Today we're going to use brown mushrooms. And we have some garlic and as well as some green onions. We're going to use some water chestnuts to give a little bit more texture and some lemongrass for flavor. You can use fresh lemongrass or the lemongrass that comes in the tubes. It doesn't really matter. So here we have our New York strip steak, and we're just going to give this a quick sear to lock some of the juices in. We have Leighton over here, and he's just going to put a little bit of oil on the pan, and we're going to brown each side. So here we're just evenly coating the pan with a tiny bit of oil, and then Leighton's going to take the steak and lay it down gently so the oil doesn't splash. Beautiful. All right, and we're going to give those about a minute on each side just to get a nice sear. So this is about the amount of sear you're looking for, just something to lock in the juices. And then we're going to take that and just let it rest for a minute, and then we're going to cut it up. So here we're going to cut our ingredients. For our steaks, we're going to slice the fat off just so that doesn't get in our dumplings, and then we're going to slice them into little cubes. And with our mushrooms, we're going to loosely chop these just so they don't get mushy, they don't get too small. And we're going to slice our green onions. For our yellow onions, we're going to dice these. And our garlic, we're going to take the side of the blade and crush the cloves to release all of that wonderful flavor. And then our water chestnuts, we're just going to do the same thing as mushrooms, just loosely chop them for texture. Here we have Leighton. The steaks have rested, and he's just taking a fork to help trim off some of that fat there. And then he's going to be slicing it. And as you can tell, the steaks are a little bit rare, and that's just so that they don't get overcooked in dumpling form. And then he's just going to take his knife and he's going to cross the other way so that they become little cubes of steak. And you can do a little bit at a time if it's kind of overwhelming to try to cut the whole steak at once. Over here, Wesley is loosely chopping the mushrooms, and he's just making sure he doesn't chop them too much so they're not mushy, just kind of giving them a nice loose chop. The trick here with the dumpling filling is to create some texture, since the dumpling dough is going to be a little bit softer. Now Wes is going to slice the green onions, and he's just giving them a nice slice so that they become a good garnish and also for the inside of the dumplings. Finally, Alden is going to dice the onions. So he's going in, he's taking half, and he's just going to chop it and give a nice dice. And finally, Alden is mincing the garlic, so he's going to chop it very evenly and into very small pieces. I'm here with my good friend Trina now, and we're going to make the dough for the dumplings. My mom taught me how to make this dough since I was very young. She taught me about when I was 5, and I can remember folding pot stickers and dumplings since then. And this is the best dumpling dough ever because it's flour and water, and that's it. And sometimes you just learn to keep it simple. Now, there's really no set recipe on how you combine the two. You just have to be watchful and make sure that the proportions make sense. So we're going to start off with some of this flour. And you have to be thinking about how much you want to make when you put the flour in. We're going to be making quite a few dumplings here, so I put in quite a bit. And then afterwards, we're going to take the water, and we're just going to pour a little bit over and start combining with our hands. Here's the part where you get dirty. And as you can see, it needs some more water. That's probably good. And we just keep mixing it till it comes to the right consistency. And don't really worry about making mistakes here because you can fix them so easily. Really, it's foolproof. And this is starting to come together. We need a little bit more water. Thank you, Trina.
No
Wonderful.
problem, Lydia.
All right. This is starting to get where we want it to be. And what you can do at this point, when it starts forming together, you can just turn it off onto the table.
So how many exactly will these make? Like, is this enough for like a big group of people, or
This is
just a
probably enough
few?
for a family dinner. of just a
Okay.
few. You can double the recipe. Really, it's up to you how much flour and water you use. It's so easy to adjust and make more dough.
I know, this is way easy. I'm gonna try this
Yes,
in my
ma'am.
hand sometime. Do you need some more water?
Just a tiny bit. Thank you. And if you need to, you can start flouring the surface. Here's where you just start to knead the dough and use your palms and press down. My grandma came from a Danish family and she taught me how to knead dough. And before, I would just kind of press it with my fingers, and you really have to manhandle the dough, which is perfect for man-approved food. You're just kind of handling this till it gets elastic. And as you can tell, it's a little bit dry. We're probably going to need a little bit more water in there. So, Trina, if you would.
That's why I'm here.
Thank you. It's just kind of a learning process that you get used to over time, finding out. And if it flakes like this, you do want more water. You want a texture where it's a little bit elastic. And so this looks like it's going to come out nicely. Just keep handling it a little bit more, maybe a tiny bit more water. So the really important thing when you're making this dough is you need to make sure that you use cold water, because if you use hot water, it's going to get all gluey and it's not going to knead nicely for you. So make sure you use cold water. It doesn't have to be ice cold. It just has to be, cold water from the tap. And your hands might get a little bit messy at this point. That's fine. Just continue to kind of knead and manhandle that dough until it's a nice consistency. So here we're taking about 2 tablespoons of butter, and we're just going to put that on the same pan as the meat because it has all those delicious meat flavors. And we're going to lightly saute some of the vegetables. First, as that butter melts, you want to just throw the garlic on there. It's going to mix with the butter and give it a really nice flavor. Here we have our onions, and we're just putting these in. You want to make sure that they don't get caramelized, so you cook it on a medium-low heat, and if they do start to get caramelized, just lower that heat. The difference is when they caramelize, they start to turn a little bit brown. We just want a nice, lightly translucent color. Here we have the ingredients that didn't get sauteed. We have our chestnuts, our green onions, and our steak. And what we're going to do is we're going to combine those with our sauteed ingredients. So Leighton, if you would, just put those all in there. Wonderful, thank you. And in addition to that, we're going to put half a teaspoon of table salt. It doesn't have to be exact, it just has to be to your preference. And then we're going to give it a quick dash of white pepper. If you don't have white pepper, black pepper also works. Just make sure you don't overdo it, just a little dash. And we're going to put in a teaspoon of lemongrass. Perfect. And then Alden, if you'd come here and just mix all that together. So now we have our dough, and we've just turned it out onto a lightly floured surface. You're going to take a knife and just divide the dough into little portions. And as you do so, make sure you stick the sticky side face down on the floured surface, just to make sure that they don't all stick together, because then you're going to have to cut them again. So eventually you're going to end up with a shape looks kind of like this. You have to make sure not to tear it like that, because then your dumpling's going to get soggy in the pot. To go with our dumplings. We're going to start with fish sauce. I find that this flavor goes a little bit better with lemongrass than soy sauce does. And this sauce is like everything else. You kind of find your own proportions. As you start making it, you find what you like. I'm going to start with about that much fish sauce. I would say that's probably about 1/8 of a cup, if that. And then put in a very tiny bit of red wine vinegar, just a splash. That kind of gives it some acidity and some dimension. We're going to put in about half a teaspoon of that lemongrass. It wants to come out. Lovely. And then garlic sriracha. I go through this stuff like none other. It's so good. And it's however much heat you can take, really. And we're gonna make ours fairly spicy, but not too bad. And what you're gonna do is you're just gonna take a fork, you don't need a whisk, just kind of break that down into a nice sauce. And you're done. So what you're gonna do now is you're going to take a pot of boiling water and you're going to very gently place the dumplings inside. You don't want them to splash. You know the dumplings are done when they rise to the top of the pot, and you're good to go. Now we can see that the dumplings are rising to the top of the pot, so what we're going to do is just take a slotted spoon. We're going to let the water drain out a little bit so they don't get too soggy. I'm going to place that on our dish here. Alright, and there you have it. Alright, now we're just going to take that pepper sauce we have. We're just going to put a little bit of that on top. You don't need too much because there's a lot of flavor in the dumplings. There's a lot of flavor in the sauce. Right now we're just enjoying our delicious dinner, and I would just like to point out that none of these are trained chefs. These are all college students, all men who haven't cooked professionally before and don't even cook much in their own kitchens. So this is just an example that anyone can do this, and you learn over time. You develop those skills that help you become a good cook and help you experiment in this laboratory we call the kitchen. And so I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and sharing this dinner experience with me, and a huge shout out to Rex Warner Productions for the filming.